All right, welcome to the Unprofessionals Podcast. I'm Joshua Sutter, and I am joined, per usual, by Nathan Page. This week, we thought it would be interesting to do a bit of discussion on the best of the best in the NBA and what they need to do or what needs to happen for them to win the NBA championship. Much has been discussed on the Warriors and Spurs this year, as it should, but we are going to talk about probably the top 6 or 7 teams in the NBA and, again, what needs to happen or what they need to do to win the title. We're also going to finish it up by talking about as of today, the best of the best in the NBA individually. So Nathan, why don't you bring it in by talking a bit about our unofficial sponsor?
Yeah, a little shout out to the mobile Hop-In, which is an Exxon gas station off of Trickham and Arnold Mill. Thank you for providing us with the Big Texases and the Starbucks Frappuccinos of the world. We need it, and we thank you. And one day we hope you'll actually be our sponsor.
Very nicely said. So with all of the introduction stuff out of the way, why don't we get the best of the best discussion started in the NBA by talking about one of the hottest teams currently in the Eastern Conference, the Toronto Raptors.
Right, and just to clarify, I mean, we're just trying to go through, and we thought it'd be fun to almost do it like not like a game, but kind of talking like, okay, what has to happen for this team to win the title? So for the Toronto Raptors, what needs to happen for them to win the title? And they're a good team. I mean, you got Kyle Lowry playing out of his mind this year. He looks like one of the best point guards in the game. Definitely. Is he the best point guard in the East?
I would still take John Wall over him if I had.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, that might be true.
I don't know.
It's right there between him and John Wall. Well, in your player rankings, you have Lowry over Wall.
Yeah, that was made 2 days ago. I don't know.
Well, the point is, you're not feeling bad if one of those guys is your point guard. As a Knicks fan, I feel terrible that Kyle Lowry did not get traded. What was it, 2 years ago? The deal was pretty much done. Anyways, he's been playing great. DeMar DeRozan is having a great year. He doesn't really get as much credit because I don't think he fits the 3-and-D, kind of mode that we're in with the NBA. Everybody is about the 3-ball, which is fun, but DeMar DeRozan is a mid-range player. DeMarre Carroll's injured, so I mean they're doing all this without a key rotation guy, and DeMarre Carroll, he would be starting for them at the 3 or 4. And Patrick Patterson coming off the bench is a great 4, playing great defense right now. And then they have Luis Scola starting, and they're number 2 in the East, and they're only 3 games back from the Cavs, 2 games back maybe now in the loss column. Anyways, they're honestly the most realistic threat that we've had. Yeah, they're 2 games back. They're the most realistic threat that we've had to LeBron James in the East, I think, since the Celtics. Would you agree with that? Of the late 2000s.
I think the Bulls pushed him pretty hard.
That's true. Yeah. The Bulls were good, but they're basically in line with those kinds of teams, and they have a point guard who can match up. They have a shooting guard who can, that LeBron's going to have to deal with, in DeMar DeRozan, and then you've got spot up shooters and strong postmen. They're going to be a pretty good matchup for the Cavs. For the Toronto Raptors to win a championship, they're going to need either Kyrie Irving or Kevin Love to get injured.
You don't think they could beat him straight up?
Okay, I mean, I could see a scenario where LeBron never figures out his shooting troubles, and the Cavs can this little blip we're seeing since the All-Star break of LeBron complaining about his teammates. What if it doesn't work? Because it seems like they're probably going to rally. Last year, this time, everybody was still like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with the Cavs? And then they get into the playoffs and run through the East. So, that's the thing for me. I'm just not buying that. I'm not buying that the Cavs are as dysfunctional as people think. They look dysfunctional because the Warriors are beating them, and because they don't look like the Warriors, and because LeBron is going down to Miami to work out. But that's, in my mind, someone on the Cavs has to get injured for the Raptors to win. The Raptors are great, and I hope that they go to 7 with the Cavs, but I don't think they have enough shooting. I'm worried DeMarre Carroll may not be healthy enough to play. So they need DeMarre Carroll to be healthy, and they need Kyle Lowry and DeMarre to be shooting really well when they get into the playoffs.
Yeah, that's all good. So I'm going to do the Los Angeles Clippers, the team that at the beginning of the season I so foolishly picked to play the Cavs in the NBA Finals. The first reason was that I really, really liked Lance and Josh Smith coming onto their team. Unfortunately, neither of them have worked out. And so that bench that I thought was going to be a real threat and filling a real weakness that the Clippers had last year has diminished to basically Luke Bamute. Is Wesley Johnson starting?
He might be. Yeah, he's starting right now with Jeff Green now. I don't know if he is. But he's a strong rotation guy.
So their big pickup was Jeff Green, whom I think he's been a big pickup for a few different teams in years past, and it's never worked out. So my disappointment with obviously not seeing how great the Warriors and the Spurs were going to be once again, and thinking that the Clippers would be able to build upon their incompetence in the final few moments of close games and come together to win the ridiculously good at the top Western Conference was kind of foolish. But in the spirit of the game, I think they can win the title. There's two scenarios that are running through my head. One, could they win the title without Blake? Or could they get to the NBA Finals without Blake? And a lot of the narrative around Blake getting injured was, well, there's some stats that show that they're better without Blake, but obviously they're not better without Blake, just the common sense. He's a fantastic player and was unbelievable in the playoffs last year. So I don't think that's possible, even though that thought did come into my mind. So the most realistic scenario is if Blake comes back and somehow they're able to figure out their crunch time lineup without DeAndre in it. Is it really reasonable for them to think that they could win the title? So in order for that to happen, I mean, it's as simple as Blake would have to be ridiculous. DeAndre would have to make a few more free throws, and they'd have to hope for some bad shooting nights by the other teams, because they are talented enough and they can play that grit style that Chris Paul likes to play. But as we've seen, that doesn't really work against Steph Curry. So it would have to be a ridiculous performance by Blake and CP3 and DeAndre as well, plus some decent threes from Jeff Green and Paul Pierce, and obviously JJ Redick, who has been having a great season. So they're probably the fourth best team I guess they're the fourth best team in the West. So it's really unrealistic for me to think that they could even get out of the West, and that's why I'm kind of grasping for straws here, is that it would just have to be a ridiculous performance by Blake and CP3 for them to even have a shot.
Yeah, and we can move on after this, but they're a very interesting team because they play the Warriors so dang well. Like, every game is intense. They go to overtime half the time. But the Warriors always win. And that honestly seemed like a pretty good matchup in some ways, as far as they have a good point guard who can make Steph work on both ends, which is what you have to do if you're playing against the Warriors. And that's why, Russ is tough for Steph because he makes him work on offense and on defense. Chris Paul runs him off of screens, bodies him up, posts him up on offense, and just as physical as all get out on defense. But anyways, so I like the Clippers. I like their team. I'm with you. I thought the Josh Smith thing would work, but that's kind of shows you, and I tweeted about this, does this prove that Doc doesn't know how to use personnel, or that Josh Smith only works on the Rockets? And probably both. But anyways, yeah, the Clippers, I love that team, but it just doesn't seem like they can do it. Anyways, moving on to now the Celtics, who are the surprise team, I would say, of the NBA this year, and that they've made a leap that most didn't expect. They're now third in the East, behind the Raptors. They're a good ways behind. They're the 2 games that separate the Raptors and Cavs. I believe it's a few more that separates the Celtics. Yeah, they're 6.5 back from the Cavs, so still a pretty close race. But wow, they're an insanely well-coached team. They have a closer in Isaiah Thomas. But honestly, at some point, I just never see this team getting beyond a more talented team. Because in the playoffs, coaching is huge. You have to be able to make the matchups, and they're going to win that battle with 90% of the teams in the NBA, maybe more. But as far as talent goes, they just don't have enough shot makers. It seems like it's kind of the Atlanta Hawks trouble last year, where if you could shut down Kyle Korver, if you could keep Teague out of the paint, then you're going to you're going to win, And so that's kind of the thing for me is with them, if you can shut down Isaiah Thomas, which is not an easy thing to do, but if you can find a way to do it, even though they run a very pass-friendly, very open offense that gets a lot of guys good shots, it's still hard for me to envision them winning. Now, they are a great defensive team, but for me, when it comes down to it, the question of this game is the Celtics will win the championship if blank happens. And in my mind, we were just joking about this. The Celtics will win a championship if you are using them in franchise mode in NBA Live or whatever game you're playing, and you turn off the trade deadline so you can make a trade in April or May, and you turn it down to rookie, and so it's real easy. To me, that's how the Celtics win a championship. It's not possible. You have to have better players, and at the end of the day, we saw it last year with the Hawks. Again, I'll go back to them. A well-coached team who's team-oriented, not about the star. But there's a reason this is a star-driven league, and there's a reason that LeBron James makes almost $30 million a year, because he is the guy who wins games for you. So, anyways.
Speaking a little bit more on the Celtics before I move on to the Cavs, I guess as a little transition, I think the number one reason that they don't have a shot is, even though they're really well-coached, they have a really good core group of guys, is against the Raptors and against the Cavs, they're always going to be down to where the other team's going to have the two best players on the floor. That's always going to happen, whether it's K-Love, Kyrie, and LeBron, or on the Raptors, whether it's DeMar Carroll, Kyle Lowry, or even DeMar DeRozan, whoever you want to look at. So even though they're a really fun team to watch and they're really well coached, they're frankly just missing a really good star, or a second really good player like Isaiah Thomas. So moving on.
Sorry. I was just gonna say that's kind of the joke about them too. Is they're full of players that every championship roster wants, but that you have to have good players around for them to succeed. So Anyways, keep going. Sorry.
So I was going to talk a little bit about the Cavaliers, the team that I picked to win the title at the beginning of the season. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that their entire offense would be clogged like a toilet for the entire season, and that watching them would consist of a lot of one-on-one basketball, J.R. Smith being their third highest player as far as minutes per game, and Kyrie being hurt and then not really looking like himself for a large portion of the games he's actually playing, in my opinion, personally. And also, I really thought that after the playoffs last year, they would, figure out how to use Kevin Love. It was kind of cool. He had the little letter, I guess, or whatever he wrote coming back to Cleveland or whatever, and it just hasn't worked. It's felt dysfunctional. It's felt like, once again, they're wasting Kevin Love, and then they fire their coach, who there was obviously some weird power stuff going on between him and LeBron, but I thought he was a good coach. I didn't mind him. And their big, acquisition, the joke was, the Cavs finally got their stretch four when they traded for Channing Frye. And I thought that was hilarious, but it's also sadly true, is that they've just not figured out how to use Kevin Love. And I'm a big LeBron defender, but you have to put part of that on him, is that he hasn't figured out how to make it work perfectly with Kyrie and Kevin Love yet. And that has to be on the best player. And up until this season, he's been the best player in the league for a few years now. So you kind of have to put that on LeBron a little bit. But for the Cavs to win the title, it really just takes those three just clicking 4 nights, in a 7-game series, basically. And that's not that difficult, because even if 2 of them go off, there's still likelihood that they're going to beat the Raptors, the Celtics, or whoever they run up against in the Eastern Conference. I think the Raptors have a shot to beat them. I don't think it's likely. So most likely the Cavs are going to be in the NBA Finals, where they're going to face the Warriors, the Spurs, or the Thunder, most likely. So in order for them to beat one of those teams, we saw last year that it's possible, even though the Warriors were a little finicky in the first few games, and that LeBron almost was up 3-1 single-handedly. So if for some miracle they can figure out the thing with Kevin Love, which after a year and a half they still haven't figured it out, so who knows if they will figure it out. But if they figure it out, and then Kyrie returns to himself and LeBron's able to do LeBron things, there's a very simple formula to where they can win the NBA title, because whoever comes out of the West is going to be beat up, whether it's the Warriors from playing the Thunder or the Spurs or whoever it may be. They're going to have a couple of really, really high intensity series in their hands. And the Cavs just could be, frankly, a lot better than the Raptors and the Celtics, and could come into the NBA finals with some decent rest and not having been tested too extensively, and then they could win. I mean, that was the formula that almost worked last year, short of them, not having 2 out of the 3 best players. So it's a very simple formula for them to win the title, and I think it's possible.
Right, and it's kind of laid out for them. That's why I think it's almost funny that people talk about them being like, what's wrong with the Cavs? And we did this last year, and it's like, in my mind, it's almost like, when are we going to learn that things are probably going to be okay? We did this almost every LeBron team for the past 6 years that he's gone, or for the past 5 years that he's gone to the championship. Mid-season, we're like, what's wrong with this team? They're not clicking. What's going on? And then they get to the playoffs, and we're like, oh, never mind. They're fine. So, and I mean, we're about to do a player rankings in a bit of players right now, and any of those 3 guys offensively are top 10 offensive players. And Kevin Love and Kyrie definitely are. LeBron is probably the best two-way player we've ever seen. He's obviously on the kind of the decline of his career. Now, his decline is different from anybody else's because even a 5% decline, he's still the second best player in the game. But anyways, so this team is built to win, and the pieces make sense. Okay, we tried to build a team. The other day we were just talking, and we're talking about, like, let's build a team that can win a championship around LeBron. We pretty much built a team that was like a secondary version of the Cavs. And because they're built with a point guard who doesn't need the ball who needs the ball to score, but he's not a true point guard. LeBron can play that point guard role. So you kind of have a scorer at point guard. I mean, you have this spot up shooter at 4 who can also rebound and play in the post. It's just built kind of well. Maybe you don't have enough defense around him. But this team makes sense from a championship perspective, and so I'm with you on that. I was going to make another point. Frick. I don't know what happened. Sorry. Okay. But anyways, and I guess I'll roll this into the next team we're going to talk about, which is the Thunder, because these two teams. Well, I wrote about these two teams and the Clippers not too long ago during the All-Star break, and just kind of how would they look dysfunctional because of what the Warriors are doing and because of what the Spurs are doing. And if you look at both of them, the Cavs and the Thunder, since the All-Star break, they've been okay. The Cavs destroyed the Thunder, obviously, but the Thunder have really not looked good since the All-Star break. And you've got Kevin Durant coming out and saying, we're fooling ourselves if we think we're a championship team. And that you got LeBron talking about, we need a goon if we're going to win a championship for the Cavs. And so I just thought it was interesting to see there's this process that the Clippers went through last year, and you could see it in the playoffs. And last year when they played the Warriors in the regular season, and even a little bit this year, they went through this process of realizing we're not good enough to beat the Warriors. Like, the Warriors, despite our best efforts, we could play a perfect game. And the Warriors could play at 85%, and they could still beat us. And so I think they experienced that, and they've kind of worked through it. And now you see the Clippers. The Clippers, to me, look like a comfortable team who understand their identity. Now, they've obviously like made some weird moves. Coach Doc and GM Doc are not my favorite, but I think that the Clippers look like a comfortable team. And now you see, I think it's tough for the Cavs and the Thunder to come to grips with, we're not good enough to beat the Warriors. And this is something that Brian Windhorst talks about, is with the Warriors, basically they can play, an 85% perfect game, or they can play just like kind of an imperfect game, and their amount that they can falter and still win is huge. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but for every other team, they have to play perfectly to beat them, and nobody can do that 4 times in a series. So I look at the Thunder, and it's like they're coming to grips with the fact that they, at their best, cannot beat the Warriors. And so that's kind of a frightening thing to think about if you're that team, and you've got to come to grips with that quickly, because all it takes is like a tweak of Klay's ankle, which I almost feel bad for Klay, because I think everybody who talks about sports has said that this season. It's like, all it takes is Klay breaking his ankle, and then it's like, what happens if Klay actually breaks his ankle? Did we all jinx him? But anyways, with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, I want to see more creativity on offense, man. It's frustrating. There's no discipline on defense. These teams play so well, but then down the stretch, they fall apart, and we've seen it twice this week. Against the Clippers, they lost after being up by 20, and against the Warriors, they lost after being ahead by 13. And so that's the thing. And I think the statistic I heard was this season, only the 76ers have lost more games when leading going into the fourth quarter. That's huge. So for me, if the Thunder have all the talent, they're a deep team. They are built a little strange. I don't really get why they added Cantor. But at the same time, like, you're kind of stuck with the cap room that you have. So for the Thunder to win the championship, they've got to find a more creative offense, which we've been saying for 4 years, so it's probably not going to happen. They've got to play disciplined on defense. They need someone on the Warriors to get injured, and they have got to find a way to close games. They've got to run an offense at the end of games that's not, I'm going to stand here and call off all the screens and go ISO one-on-one on this guy and take a hard shot, which Kevin Durant can make 50% of the time. But I'm sorry, but defenses are too good now for you to stand around and play ISO ball. It just is not going to work against the best teams in the league.
Yeah, that's all good. Why don't you talk a little bit about Russell Westbrook and how your weird arc of him as one of your favorite NBA players has developed over this season and then, throughout his career?
Yeah, well, so I think it was probably 2011, 2012-ish when I started paying attention to him because I thought his competitive nature was really intriguing. He played on the court with a bit of a chip that you don't see as often anymore in the NBA in the NBA of millennials. It's very everybody's a friend. Everybody hangs out with each other. It seems like, especially the LeBron, Melo, Dwayne Wade culture has kind of influenced the NBA in a cool way. But then you have this Russell Westbrook character that almost disrupts all of that. He comes into the game and is just this disruption of the normal flow of the game, of the normal competitive balance. He's just an interesting player. And so I've just been following him. And last year, he went on his rampage of triple doubles and one-man fast breaks and super intriguing. He broke his face and played the next game. He's a madman, and he's the closest thing athletically and competitiveness wise. That's okay, whatever, however you could say that. He's the closest thing to Jordan in that way that we've ever seen. Kobe is a similar kind of player. I'm talking mentality and athleticism, so people don't take that the wrong way. I'm not comparing him to Jordan as far as his career and his legacy, but athletically and competitively, he is the same kind of guy. He's built as a guy who wants to win every game at all costs. I need to be the guy. I need to be the savior. I'm not going to let our team go down. So I admire that about him, and I defended it. And this year, he's averaging 10 assists. You're seeing how he's using that athleticism to get in the lane, to dump off to his teammates. He's becoming a much better point guard. But at the same time, the more I've watched him, especially since the All-Star break, I've been really disappointed. He still does the kind of things that I noticed with Blake Griffin, which Blake was, like you said, he was insane in the playoffs. And so Blake is a great player, but one of my frustrations with him, and it's the same with Russ, is when it gets down to the last 3 minutes, they freak out. They do stupid things. They get in the lane and throw up stupid shots. The other night, Russ chucks up a 3 with 2 men on him, a double pump with a man on him 3, and tries to claim he got fouled. I'm like, nobody calls that foul. And so when you see guys like Damian Lillard, the way he responds, the way Steph responds in the fourth quarter, those are the kind of point guards you want. The way Chris Paul responds in the fourth quarter. And then you see Russ, and it just gets frustrating. And I was going to write this long piece about him, kind of a 5-part piece that I talked about. And I the more I've watched him, the more it's harder for me to write that with conviction, because I'm still convinced he's a top 5 player, top 5 talent, but I need to see more out of him from a finishing perspective.
Yeah, that all makes sense, and I pretty much echo everything you said about the Thunder. They have 2 of the top 5 players in the NBA in both of our opinions. So we give them a chance in any series, but in order for them to advance and win the NBA title, it looks like they're going to have to play the Spurs and the Warriors, which is just brutal. So it's not likely, but if anyone can do it, it's a team with KD, Russ, and then Serge, who's a fantastic player as well. So moving on to the San Antonio Spurs, our second to last team. We saved the 2 best teams in the NBA for last. As we're recording this, which this is Saturday morning, so who knows when it'll actually come out, but the Spurs are 52-9. And as of right now, they're still undefeated at home. And they're just ridiculous. And if it weren't for the Warriors being on a ridiculous pace to break the MJ Bulls single season wins record, we'd probably all be yapping about the Spurs, but it's crazy to think that in a year they're 52-9, the San Antonio Spurs are still somehow flying a little bit under the radar, which is what happens with them seemingly every single year, and it's just ridiculous. So coming into the playoffs here in a little bit, they're going to be the second seed in the West, most likely, short of an injury, short of Clay breaking his ankle. So it looks like they're on a collision course with the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, short of an OKC explosion. So in order for them to win the title, because I think the Cavs would have a better chance of beating the Warriors than the Spurs. So I think the Spurs' real test would be in the Western Conference, obviously, against the Warriors. So in order for them to beat the Warriors, it's really just going to take Kawhi playing the way he is, but amping it up another notch in the playoffs, just like we see most great players do. So I think that's his next step because, in my player rankings, we'll talk about this, I have him as the fourth best player in the NBA right now. So in order for him to really vault himself and to validate that, we need I'm the man playoffs performance. And I feel like we've seen that a little bit from him, but not to the level that a top 5 player should do. So I think that, and then the aspect of LaMarcus Aldridge hasn't really resulted the way I thought it would watching them. He's still obviously a great post player, but it hasn't come to the post, basically what I thought it would do to their offense. And I can't really put it into words, but it hasn't looked like I thought it would. And I say that and they're 52-9. So obviously something's working, but it'll be interesting to see them play the Warriors. And obviously I don't think the regular season, we've always seen this with the Spurs, it never does them full justice. Despite being 52-9, they're still somehow hiding stuff, and we know that's true with Pop. He always does that, so it's hard to really judge the Aldridge experience, and that's why I haven't really talked about it a ton, because until we see how they use him in the playoffs, him and Duncan specifically, with Kawhi at the small ball 4 with Aldridge at the 5, so we don't really know how that's going to work and how that's going to play out at their peak performance. So I'm reserving a little bit of judgment on the Spurs, but I don't think it takes much for them to win the title because, and this is kind of a cop out on the answer, but I think Pop just probably has something up his sleeve, and I think they really have a shot to beat the Warriors, and not many teams can say that.
What do you think about? Because there's two trains of thought. I hear people people talk out of both sides of their mouth and don't realize it, and I've probably done it. What worked last year against the Warriors, at first, maybe it didn't work in the end, was the Cavs slowing the ball down, playing big, playing with LeBron at 4, and then having him run the show on offense. That also worked when they played small ball. So with the Spurs, you could argue that they're built to do that. Their pace is actually bottom of the league this year as far as how slow they play. So do you think that helps the Spurs' chances, or does that hurt them? Because the argument can be made, when the Warriors played them, the first 5 minutes of the game, they ran them off the court. I've never seen the Warriors play that fast. So does it, it goes both ways. Can the Spurs control the pace, or do the Warriors run them off the court?
I think it's hard. I think the Warriors have learned how to control the pace when they want to. So I don't even necessarily think that would be necessary for the Spurs to beat them. We've never seen a team actually fully beat the Warriors while playing two big guys, really. The Cavs did it in a couple games, but they weren't really ever... I can't really remember specifically, but I feel like they never were playing like a Duncan and an Aldridge together. So I'm really interested to see how that works. I don't think it will work, honestly. I don't think that's the lineup that's going to be able to take the Warriors on in crunch time. I think it's the Kawhi at the 4 with either Duncan or Aldridge at the 5. That's more likely to happen. The problem with that is then they're stretched wide, and they're going to be playing to the Warriors' strength, which is running up and down the court and playing small. So it's difficult to say that they could play small and beat them, or they could play big and beat them, because you could argue with either one of those that the Warriors are going to be better. And let's say the Warriors play their normal starting lineup against the Spurs with Duncan and Aldridge. As soon as that happens, they're going to go small because they see an advantage that they can exploit. And at that point, are the Spurs going to switch to the small lineup, or are they going to stay big? And if they stay big, is that big lineup going to be versatile enough, both in the way they play defense and the way that they organize their half-court offense, to actually slow it down a little bit and to play efficient enough to beat the Warriors when they're playing small? So I think that's probably the crux of the series, is the Warriors small versus if the Spurs play big. And we've seen time and time again, whenever we think that formula may work against the Warriors, it never does. But, and there's a big but there, Greg Popovich, if anyone, can figure out how to make that work. So I think it's very likely that they could take the Warriors to 7 games. And if you go to 7 games, I mean, who knows? But the problem if you go to 7 games is that Steph could pull up from half court and end it. So it's obviously going to be an unbelievable task for the Spurs to take down the Warriors. But with guys like the leaders they have on their team, plus the talent with Kawhi, Aldridge, and Parker playing better this season, I mean, it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I agreed. And I mean, if you haven't watched enough Spurs this year, which you probably haven't because it seems like they're never on TV, I watched the last 4 minutes of the what was it, New Orleans for San Antonio game, and I think New Orleans was up by 11-13 or something like that with 4 minutes left. I was a little bit surprised. Maybe it was less than that. But next thing I know, the Spurs are winning by 9, and the game's over. Now, granted, the Pelicans made me so mad because Davis literally didn't touch the ball the last 4 minutes of the game. Inexcusable. If you have one of the best players in the game, he doesn't touch the ball in a closing situation. So that's partially their fault. But at the same time, the Spurs are so efficient on offense, and they are historically the best defensive team we've seen in 20 years, maybe ever. So their win differential is the best ever. Their record is insane. They're about to, if they go undefeated at home, which the Warriors could do as well, they're just an insane team. So if you haven't watched enough of them, I haven't either, so try to watch some, and hopefully we'll watch them play the Warriors, which we'll see them, I guess, 2 more times this year, 3 more times? 2 more times? Okay. Anyway, so with the Warriors, the Golden State Warriors, who get talked about on every sports talking show ever, what do they have to do to win a title? I would say stay as is. What else do you say about that? I know that there's 2 things that concern me. If there are anything that concerns me, it's they. And again, this seems so silly because the Heat teams did the same thing that won the titles, but they get out-rebounded. They're not a very good rebounding team, especially against a team like the Thunder or against the Spurs or Cavs, which are the 3 teams that have the best chance of winning against them. They need to figure out a way to rebound Draymond. Maybe that's just what they sacrifice. But with Clay, Steph, Draymond, and then you got Harrison Barnes, who hits every corner 3. You got Bogut, who's one of the most effective defensive centers in the game, and he doesn't get enough credit for that. And the thing is about the Warriors that doesn't. It's one thing to talk about the shooting, and they've got Steph, who's on another level this year. He's got a PER through the roof. His per 36 numbers are insane. Whatever advanced statistic you want to use, they have all of the best statistic offensive lineups. And then you come down to it, they are the smartest team in basketball. And like the Andrew Bogut interview with Zach Lowe the other day was phenomenal. He's such a smart player, such a heady player. Andre Iguodala is the same way. Draymond's the same way. Steph is the same way. Like, all of these guys are thoughtful guys. Harrison Barnes is considered the NBA, thinking man or whatever. He's the thinker of the NBA. It's like all of these guys are brilliant players. Steve Kerr is a brilliant coach. They all pass well. Sean Livingston is your backup point guard, and he could start for teams like the Knicks, the Nets. Teams are salivating for a point guard like that. So I don't know. This team is full of guys who could be starting on other teams, who are smart, selfless, and who are willing to do what it takes to win a championship. And you look at their point guard and their MVP, Steph, and he is the leader of that. In that, how many times has he had a chance to break the 3-point record this year for threes in a game, but just hasn't because it's not necessary? That to me is, it's a small thing, and it's like, whatever, who cares? Anybody would do that. But to me, that speaks volumes of his selflessness, and this team is focused on the right things. If they stay healthy, And if, barring like them getting out rebounded by 30 again, but we've seen they can get out rebounded by 30 and still beat you, like they did to the Thunder the other night. I don't know how you beat this team. I know the Spurs are great, but they beat the Spurs by 30. Maybe we need to see them play the Spurs again. I know the Clippers can play well with Chris Paul, but we've seen them beat the Clippers every time for the past three seasons. I know the Thunder have the talent to wreak havoc on the Warriors, and they can out-rebound them, but we've seen recently twice that the Warriors can finish against the Thunder. So I don't know. At this point, I'm not sure. To me, I agree with you. I think the Cavs have the best chance at beating them because we've seen them come close. And I think they have the offensive talent and the depth to do that, just because, I mean, if things ever click for the Cavs, which I assume they will in the playoffs, they have a chance. But for the Warriors to win the championship, they've got to stay as is. And I've heard the argument of, well, they're going to be tired from trying to chase the regular season record. People don't realize Steph doesn't play the majority of fourth quarters. What's his minutes per game? He plays 34 minutes per game, almost. Nobody on the team plays more than 35 minutes a game. And every other team is way different than that, except for the Spurs. And you talk about, well, they're getting to the playoffs, they're going to play really tough series. Like, what if they have to play Portland? Well, every other team in the West is going to have to play a really talented team. So if they have to play Portland, then somebody else is having to play the Mavs, who are a good team, or someone else is having to. I mean, it's just every team in the West has to play a good team. So I'm not really concerned about that. Anyways, so that's kind of my spiel. It's not really very original. The Warriors are really good. Really good. And I don't think people appreciate, and this is a classic, this isn't a hot take, but I don't think people appreciate the greatness of the Warriors. People don't realize, like, sure, the Spurs are close to them, but we've never seen a team like the Warriors who can play any style, who have invented but perfected the new way to play NBA basketball. So
definitely. My quick 2 cents on the Warriors is I've tried to appreciate their team as a whole more recently, which is so difficult because, like, the Thunder game when Steph, the first Thunder, or the Thunder game before the one that happened this weekend, when he hit the half-court shot, and it's hard it's hard to stay focused on all the little stuff with them, because as soon as you do that, Steph hits, a 35-foot three-pointer, and you turn into the little kid, you're yelling, you're screaming, you're smiling, you're laughing, and it's so hard to stay focused on the little things with them. And in order to do all of that, I think that's when you get the full appreciation of them, like you said, because it is hard to fully appreciate how good they are when they're 26-0 at home as we speak. They play the Lakers tomorrow, so I don't expect the record to change besides just another win. But they're just a ridiculous team. And like you said, nobody on their team plays more than 35 minutes a game. Steph is averaging 30 points per game while only playing 34 minutes a game. And it's just like, every time you refresh their stats page, it's like you could look at it 5 times within 10 minutes and it's still just like, it's laughable. Like, their team is so good and it's such an enjoyable brand of basketball. And a lot of the discussion of the analytics community with Simmons having Kirk Goldsberry on his podcast with the whole, is the three-pointer and the way that they're doing it, the death of the power forward. And I think that's a valid conversation to have. But I think if we do reach a tipping point with the small ball and the threes, I think we're at the climax of it right now. Like, if it just gets crazier and crazier, then yeah, they're probably going to change the rules, and they probably should, because the post game is fun to watch, and an intricate or really, really good power forward is fun to watch. So that's another discussion for another day. But what the Warriors are doing is the climax of small ball basketball with 3-pointers. Like, I can't imagine a world where there's a more enjoyable version of what the Warriors are doing, because it's easy to enjoy for the average basketball fan, and it's even more enjoyable for the guy who can watch the Warriors without screaming every time Steph hits a three, unlike myself. So they hit the deep divers of basketball and the kid who watches 3 NBA games a year. Like, they're just the most enjoyable basketball team I can remember in recent memory. And kind of comparing them with the LeBron Heat, they were really good as well, but they weren't as enjoyable on both sides of the analytical community and the everyman basketball community. So what we're seeing is special. And like you said, in order for them to win the title, they really just have to stay somewhat healthy and you saw Draymond had an awful game against the Thunder and Steph still won it for him. So even if one or two of them have an awful game, they're such a complete and well-coached team that it's just, I feel silly for not seeing how great they were at the beginning of the season and picking the Clippers to go to the title. But I even feel silly for not just saying, the Warriors are probably just going to run it back because they're just an unbelievable team. So
right.
Do you have anything to say before we move on?
Well, I was going to add, we didn't plan this, but well, funny that you mentioned Draymond had a terrible game, but in that game, did you see the rest of his stat line? It was like 16 rebounds, 7 assists, 6 steals, 4 blocks. Absurd. Like, that's a bad game because he didn't score, but like, man, that's what this team is about. It shows you he can contribute without scoring. And but you mentioned the like changing of the style of basketball, and that's been a big conversation lately. And people like Mark Cuban talked about we need to change the 3-point line because too many people are shooting. And they're going to shatter the record for 3 points attempted this year, but the percentage of 3-point shooting as far as makes and all that is going to be about the same. It's going to be the same percentage, but the amount of shots are going up. So my question for you is, I thought Colin Cowherd made a point this week that was super interesting, and that he read an article that somebody wrote in 1996 about the Bulls. And the guy was going on this rant about how basketball has changed. It used to be this beautiful open game with guys running up and down the court, passing the ball. It was fluid and it was beautiful, and it was something fun to watch. But now it's slow, it's archaic, it's all about one-on-one, it's ISO basketball. So my thing is is this just a natural progression of basketball? Like, are we not going to eventually go back, or are there always going to be teams there's always going to be one team that does one thing? Like a few years ago, like mid-2000s, the only team that did this were the Suns. Now, obviously, there are more teams trying to replicate it, but there's still a team like Memphis who now, because of age, is falling off. But the Clippers don't run and gun. They're a half-court team, I would say. They're built to be a half-court team. You've got a team like the Cavs who play half-court. I don't know, but I guess that's a question to you. Okay, we've seen this with the 96 Bulls. These teams are talked about all the time. Difference in style, but still a game changer and historic. Like, what is it? Is there something does something need to change, or is this just a natural progression?
I don't think we're at the point yet to where something needs to change, because, and this is the smart point that's made often with this conversation, is that you don't change the rules for one guy who's ridiculous. And even though there's guys like JJ Redick and probably Clay who have good percentages from the Steph line, that's still only a few guys. So no, you don't change the rules because of a few guys. And that's interesting you brought up the Colin Cowherd point about him reading that article, because you see that in many different walks of life with, the crazy thing that's happening now. Like with presidents, it's always like, oh, the world's going to end because of this person. And then most of the time, the world progresses and you move on. Now, whether that changes or not with different presidents, whatever, who knows? But most likely, everyone in their time thinks that the anomaly is going to change everything forever. And most of the time, it's just a natural progression of the world. And it's the same thing with basketball. It was beautiful and flowing and all that back in the day. Then in the 90s and the late 80s, it got crazy and it was physical and it was brutal to watch sometimes. And now we're in 2016 and the Warriors are jacking up ridiculous amounts of threes, and they're making, as of Saturday, 42% of them, which so it's gorgeous to watch, and I don't think that they should change the rules, nor do I think they will change the rules, because Adam Silver's smart, and he's not going to change the rules for one, or if you get JJ Redick and Clay involved, a few guys in the league who are making threes at a ridiculous pace. He's not going to change the rules or make the 3-point line ridiculous length. Widening the court's a different conversation, because that just may be smart, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the game, and I don't think they're going to change it for just the sake of changing it.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I hope that's the case, because another point that was made that I think is important, and people talk about, you don't do this rule for the guys who can shoot well, you do it for the guys who can't shoot well, because they're all shooting threes. But I think that we discount, if we move the line back, I think we discount the difficulty of making a 23-foot jump shot. Like what Steph is doing, he makes it look easy. It's not. Like it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work, and that's a hard shot to make. And, we play pickup basketball, and our friends try to take those shots, and like those are the shots we all groan about when they take them. But it's like that's not an easy thing. So I hate almost to change the rules because we've got this guy who is indescribable and that we've never seen before, and that makes players from the 70s and 80s scratch their heads and angry. If we have this kind of guy, like I don't want to change the rules right now just because it looks easy or because there are guys trying to copy it. I think that this is one of those things that's going to realign. Defenses are going to catch up eventually. It's just what it is. Anyways, glad we got to talk about all that, but we'll move on now. We saw kind of a power ranking list recently of players in the NBA. When I say power rankings, it's similar to the power rankings you'll see of teams. Like the NFL, a team could be 3 and 4. They just won 3 straight against really good teams. They just beat the Patriots and the Steelers and the Cowboys when they're healthy. So you put this team higher on the list. Maybe they're 12th instead of 18th where they should be because they're playing really well right now. So this list, it's not representative of your off-season list or maybe even who's actually the best player in the league. It's talking about who are the best players right now based on their current hot streak or based on how well they're playing at this moment as of Saturday.
So the top 5 players in the NBA, for the sake of time, we're not going to do 10 because we've gone a little bit long with our best teams in the NBA discussion and why they can win the title. So at 5, I have Russ. For all the reasons you stated, he's a little bit eccentric with his playing style. He can be unbelievable, but at the same time, he can throw up a 3 from ridiculous lengths over 2 guys to try to draw a foul, and it's just an awful basketball decision. So for that reason, he's at 5. And for those same reasons, Kawhi is at 4 because he's the exact opposite. He's cool, he's calm, he's controlled. That can be a negative sometimes, but most of the time in the playoffs, that's a positive. At 3, I have Kevin Durant for all the reasons that you love Kevin Durant. Great shooter, great player, and I'm really just very thankful that he came back this season and as good as he was before the foot injury, and his ceiling is just still unbelievable. At 2, I have LeBron. Despite his poor shooting this year, he's still LeBron, and I still think his ceiling in playoff games is really, really high. Hence, him being number 2 on my list. And number 1 is Steph, just because he's having an unbelievable year once again, better than last season, and can just straight up take over games despite his. It's so funny watching him do his thing because he's such a small player and has a slight build. So just watching him take on these guys is just unbelievable to watch. So he's number 1 for ceiling and for consistency.
Right, and to clarify, this is the list of where these guys are right now. It's a power rankings, so it's not like if we were building a team, we would pick these guys. It's where are these guys right now, hot streaks, cold streaks, how are their teams doing, similar to what you'd see in NFL and NBA power rankings. Anyways, with that said, at number 5, Dame Lillard. I had to kick out Russ. The way he's finished a couple of games since, or not a couple, several games since the All-Star break has been alarming, frustrating. It looks like a regression from all of the work he's done this season in building up a new reputation for being a team guy. It's frustrating to watch. So Dame Lillard is kind of the opposite in that since they announced he wasn't going to be an All-Star, they were 13-2, maybe better than that. They've only lost 2 games except for last night. Of course, he went for 50 again. We're taping this on a Saturday, so on a Friday night he went for 50 against the Raptors. They barely lost. Right now, he is the hottest player in the NBA other than Steph. He's had 3 50-point games this season. He's had 2 since the All-Star break. I think he's had another one earlier in the season. Anyways, he's been great, a phenomenal player from everything we hear, and there's been a lot of articles coming out recently about him and the Trailblazers. He's a great teammate. But anyways, he's having a great stretch here since the All-Star break, and you can tell he's playing like someone who felt like he deserved to be an All-Star. Number 4, I am also going to put Kawhi Leonard. He is underappreciated, phenomenal defender. I think maybe overstated how good of a defender he is in a way, but he is still a great defender, Scottie Pippen-esque, and he's developed such a good scoring game. It's really cool to watch his development. A really likable guy. And then at number 3, I think probably the most underappreciated player in the NBA somehow still, Kevin Durant. But yeah, he also escapes the criticism of guys like Russ and LeBron somehow. So he's somewhere in that middle of the way people love him but don't appreciate him enough, and are frustrated with him but don't hate on him enough. And he's a great two-way player, underappreciated on defense, one of the best scorers we've ever seen, and he's having a really good stretch. Even though Russ is having a bad stretch and the Thunder have not looked good, he's playing at a high level, still scoring really well. And gotta love Kevin Durant. Number 2, of course, LeBron. He's showing you that he's still the kind of guy that can do whatever you ask him to. And I love that the Cavs finally put him at the 4. They've been starting him at the 4 recently. That's where he belongs. I think that's where he can control the game on an offensive perspective. And defensively, he can cover those guys. He creates mismatches everywhere. He's strong enough to play against 4s, and he's phenomenal. And then Steph Curry, of course, for the reasons you stated. There's not a player in the game who impacts a minute-to-minute basis of a game like he does. He controls everything. He changes everything. Literally, they could be down by 9 and catch up in a matter of 30 seconds, 45 seconds, because Steph hits a couple threes. So, that's our list again. Kind of, we may update this as we do podcasts. Just where are our top 5, top 10 power rankings, just to kind of talk about it. It's always fun.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think that puts a good bow on the podcast overall. So thanks for listening, everyone. You can check us out on iTunes and SoundCloud to subscribe to hear our future podcasts, and you can visit us at unprofession.com. Find us on all the social media pages, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, by searching The Unprofessionals or at Unprofession. Coming up soon, hopefully, I'll have a piece on Barcelona, kind of the same angle that Nathan took with the Warriors, except Barcelona are probably the best sports team in the entire world with how great their entire team is, so I'll have that coming up. And congratulations to the People vs. O.J. Simpson television show writers for pulling off the massive news story this week that a knife was found on the property of O.J. Simpson some time ago and is now coming into the fold to being, searched for DNA evidence. Of course, I'm pretty sure the case can't even be reopened because of double jeopardy, but it's still pretty crazy that happened amidst the TV show going on currently, which is fantastic, by the way, if you haven't watched it. So thanks for listening and have a good one.
Thanks.